Hi guys, it's Kelly Latevola here and back with another video for Neat and Tangled. Today we're going to be using the Schoolhouse stamp set. This is new from July of 2017 release, and then I'm also going to be using the dies to go with it. Now normally, I love a one layer card, but I really thought it would be kind of fun just to do a little something different. So for the background, I'm using some Canson watercolor paper, and I'm going to do just a super quick background with some distress inks. Using a number 8 round brush from the Silver Brush Company, and just kind of laying down a rectangle of clean water. I'm going to do a wet and wet technique, which means the paper is wet and the pigment is wet. So I'm going to drop in first just some Salty Ocean, more toward the top, down to the middle center. And then I'm going to drop in some Twisted Citron from the middle center down to the bottom. And then I'm just going to let them kind of do their thing. That's the beauty of the wet on wet technique. They'll blend on their own. Just to add a little bit of interest, I'm going to add 2 darker shades. For the blue, it's going to be the Blueprint Sketch. And I'm not really working to mix them myself. I'm just kind of dropping it in. This is definitely more toward the center, so it gets lighter out toward the edges. And then for the green, the darker color is going to be Mowed Lawn. Once I was happy with the way that kind of laid, I picked up a number 2 round brush just because I like the smaller splatters that I get with this. The number 8, when I can get it to do it, which is really rare to be honest, they're very large, and I just wanted something to kind of break up that edge. So I did the splatters in each color. So the Salty Ocean I did mainly on the top outside edge. The Blueprint Sketch I did kind of in the middle. Same thing with the Mowed Lawn, because it's darker, I did it mostly in the middle, and then the Twisted Citron out on the edge. I went ahead and dried this with my heat tool because I am like helpless not to do the clear water droplets so that it picks up some of the pigment. I don't know why, like I can't do a distress ink background without doing this. It just looks super cool. So I just did the clear water and then blotted that up with a paper towel, and then I'm going to set that aside to dry. Basically, this video is like 20 minutes of Copic coloring. So I stamped out all of my images in intense black ink from Simon Says Stamp, and then I went ahead and die cut them as well. Normally I would stamp them all out first and then do my coloring and then die cut them. But I was actually doing these pieces when I was working on the wrap-up video for release week. So I already had them cut out. I wasn't going to do it again. So we're starting with the bear. We're going to be using the E50s family. I just went ahead and filled him in completely with the lightest color, which was the E53. And then I'm going to start doing my shading. I typically color everything as if my light source is in the top right-hand corner. So the lighter areas would be on the right-hand side the way that he's facing. I'm going to add some shading underneath his neck, underneath his arm, along his back, along the undersides of his arms as well. And then I love his little belly. I just think his belly's so adorable. So where his belly is tucked underneath his leg, there would be shading. There would be shading on the leg that's behind, and then from the front I will add shading on the left-hand side to that front leg. Then we're going to move on to the 57. This one I'm going to add shading, but I'm not going to carry it over quite as far. He is going to be a little bit darker, more of a traditional brown bear. And again, doing the same, I'm adding shading in the same places. I'm just not going up as far as I did with the E55 underneath his arms, along that outside edge. And you'll notice as we're doing each one of these, because there's so many colorings, like I seriously hope you got a cup of coffee before you sat down, or tea, or whatever you will need for the next 20 minutes. But when I do the shading on a die cut image that has the white border where I've already die cut it, I have a tendency to give myself a little guideline. So I make a line of whatever the color is, and then I flick out from that line because I want to keep that white border intact. If you have a oops or your markers bleed, usually you can get it with a colorless blender. If you can't, the white gel pen is your best friend. Just re-outline it with a white gel pen. Nobody will ever know. So anyway, we made it out to the darkest color. We're going to work our way back into the lightest color just to kind of blend everything out. I typically color in 2 layers because that's just what works for me, how I feel like I get the best blend and have the best control over my color. Completely not necessary. If you can do it in 1, go you, do it. If you need to do it 3 times, also totally fine. Like whatever you need to do to be happy with your coloring, it's your project. There isn't a right or a wrong way to do it. There's only different ways, and different isn't wrong. So from there, the bear is colored, and then we're going to move on to his backpack. So I picked out some blues and reds. When I was doing this card, I kept to pretty traditional primary colors. That just seemed like what made the most sense to me. I'm sure that they'd be super cute in plenty of other colors. So I'm going to color the little pocket. I'm not sure if it's a pocket or a patch. I think it's a pocket on his backpack red. And then I went with like a more classic blue combination versus like a more Tiffany blue that is sometimes really popular, which is also pretty. But this again, those primary colors. So I'm adding the shading on his backpack. I'm leaving some lighter areas on the tops of his strap. So the one that's tucked up under his chin will be darker where it's tucked, but the area where it's rounding out will have a little bit of a highlight. And then the same thing where it comes out from under his arm. It will be darker where it's tucked, but the area that is directly coming out from underneath will be a little bit lighter. So working out to that darkest color, and I'm really just adding little teeny tiny lines of the darkest color. I'm not trying to get crazy with it. I probably didn't even need 4 colors, but old habits die hard, people. You could probably get away with 3 or maybe even 2. So blended all of that back out to the lightest, and then I just picked up an R20 just to give his ears just a little bit of pink, and then I'm going to call him done, move on to the next thing, because we got a lot of stuff to color here, folks. This little lunchbox, which is super cute, so I decided I was going to do this red. This is my go-to red combination. That's just the one that I prefer. I feel like it gives me really good contrast, and so I can get a lot of depth out of it. So I'm filling everything in except for that label on the front with my lightest color, and then starting to add some shading because it's drawn like a 3D object. So there is a top to the lunchbox. That's going to be darker. It's automatically going to be darker. So anytime you see something that's drawn that way, the side of it or the top of it will be darker than what's up front. So again, I'm still coloring as if my light source was in the top right hand corner. So the right hand side is going to be lighter, adding the majority shading to my bottom left portion of it. And then I'm not going to color the entire side with the darkest color, but I am going to shade it from the left hand side, because even though the top is darker than the rest of it, it would still be a little bit lighter on that right hand side where the light would be hitting it. So same thing we've been doing, just working out from the darkest. Well, I guess technically we are. So working out to the darkest and then from the darkest back to the lightest. I picked 2 yellows. I don't even know what I was thinking. So I was going to make it blue. That was my game plan. In my head, I was like, I'm going to make this label blue. It'll tie in with the backpack. It'll all be good. And then I picked out 2 yellow. I don't even know what I was doing. So I filled it in with the lightest color and then just did a little bit of shading with a Y38, which is more on the orange side. In hindsight, I wish I would have done it the same color combinations that I used for the bus and the pencil, but I didn't. It was the first yellow thing I colored. So whatever. It's not like it's terribly clashy, and I'm not doing it again. You guys, by now. No. So for this little tiny mouse, which there are 2 of them, there's 2 of them in the set. I didn't color 2 of them. I only colored 1. Anyway, there's 2 in the set, and they're facing different directions, which I think is super cute because then they can kind of be interactive with each other or with the objects, and that's a lot of fun. So here I'm doing the shading again, still on the left-hand side, and I'm being just using very little of that C5 because I want him to be gray, but I don't want him to be dark gray. And then I'm going to blend out that C5 with the C3 and then kind of give him just a once over with the C1 so everything's blended together. I'm going to use that same R20 to put a little bit of pink in his ears. if you find when you're coloring a lighter animal, like here I'm using the C1, that the pink is kind of stark, just go back over it with the lightest gray that you're using, and they should blend pretty nicely. So I'm using that R20 and the R32, R35 to shade this eraser, and again leaving that highlight on the top. And it looks a little bit dark here, but when it dries back, it really does look kind of pencil eraser-ish. Using the same grays that I used for my little mouse to create some metal. So you hear me all the time talk about like those light flicking motions and using just the tip of your marker. Those are really important when you're trying to color something metal, because by using those strokes, those little flicking motions, that's what's going to give the appearance of shininess. So you just want to add them to the outside and leave that highlight in the center. So for the C, I used the C5 to color in just the lead of the pencil, and then I brought in an E50. Now originally when I had done the bear, I had picked out E53 through E59. I went back to get the E50 because I felt like that made more sense for a freshly sharpened pencil. And then I picked out a couple of other yellows. I kept that Y08, but I picked out some other yellows that were a little bit more subdued for my pencil. Now we want to color this so that it looks kind of dimensional, so I'm leaving a white area, like a white highlight on the center and on the top. The bottom I'm filling in completely. And then I'm going to start adding shading along those lines, because that is where they would be shaded in real life. Like there would be shading slightly underneath those lines because they would be sticking out from the pencil. That's the shape of the pencil. So again, I'm just doing little lines here. I'm not doing really any flicking. I'm just doing the little lines of color because I'm trying to conserve those highlights. That's what's going to really give us that dimensional look. That, in addition to our contrast, having that bottom section darker is again going to play that up because it would be facing the bottom. There would be no light getting to that. So for the highlight, even though I had left it white, I just went over it one time with the Y11, which is a very light yellow, and still conserves that highlight. Using the same color combination for the school bus, I'm just going to fill in the whole thing with my lightest yellow color, minus the windows and the wheels. You know, things that wouldn't be yellow. I don't have to explain this to you. You got it. You're with me. So I'm going to do shading from the bottom up. The only time I'm really doing anything different is I'm adding a line in between the doors. There would be shading there, and then along the top of the roof, I'm adding a little bit of shading. And then again, we're just working out to the darkest color. You'll see me hit all those same areas every single time, because when I go through the first time, that's exactly what I do. I don't necessarily take the color up as high or add as much of the darker colors, but I'm hitting each one of those areas the same every time. I skipped the Y21 when I was blending it back out because I didn't think that it was necessary. I just went in with the Y08, and then I'm going to hit everything one more time with that Y11 to make sure we're all blended and good to go. For the wheels, I did a C5 for the actual tire, which is so funny because when you see it, all colors are comparative to other colors. So when you see the C5 next to the yellow, it looks black. But when you see it next to like a C9, it totally looks gray. It's just very funny to me. So don't think that you need to go super dark. You don't. I'm going to fill in the hubcaps with a C3. You saw me add a couple little blue lines there to the windows. I also got the headlight because I had forgotten that before. In order to blend those out, I'm just going to go in with a colorless blender because I just want them to look like there's a little bit of a reflection. Then that's done, and we're moving on to the next. So for this apple, sorry about that cut part. When I was in the middle of coloring, it's like 2 o'clock in the morning, my son started crying, and so I had to interrupt my coloring to go see what the problem was. And basically it was that he couldn't get his feet tucked under the blanket. I mean, what? But anyway, we got him tucked in. Don't worry. Don't lose any sleep over it. He got his feet tucked in, and everything could go back and be fine. He went right back to sleep. Whatever. Anyway, so here I left just a little bit of a highlight right next to the area that's already drawn in as a highlight. And then again, doing the shading from that left-hand side. over, I am adding a little bit of shading around the back side because the highlight wouldn't go all the way to the edge. It just wouldn't. It will be more on the rounded front of it where it's actually drawn in. So here I did get a little bit heavy-handed with the R59, but I'm okay with it. The apple is very large as far as like the amount of color that you can put on it. So I was easily able to just, you know, blend everything in. And then because Copics are transparent, you can lighten up darker colors by putting a lighter color over it. I chose to do that around the highlight area because I didn't really leave a whole lot of real estate for myself to have a highlight. I colored in the stem with the E55 and then got out some greens. And like I said at the beginning, I was looking for more of those primary colors. So I didn't go for so much of a yellow green as a traditional green. I did use a YG06 as the base of the color. It is a yellow green, but it does have more of a blue base. And then really for the shading, I just did a little bit of shading more towards the stem and then the back of the leaf I added shading to. For my fox, I'm going to use the same E50s, but I'm starting with the E50, the actual 50, because I wanted his little belly to be lighter. So I'm going to do some shading underneath his chin, which is actually gives him like this little beard, which is it's very funny until we blend it out. And then there'll be shading where in front of his leg, and then also a little bit on the left-hand side. I also did his feet and his tail the same way, and then I'm going to fill in his whole body with that E53. Just, that's going to be my base color for the rest of it. So the shading color for the belly, the base color for the rest of the fox. I'm going to go in with the E55. I'm going to add lots of darker color underneath his face, where his chin is, and then also behind his nose. There would be some shading on where his arm's coming out from behind his body, where his arm is coming up. That would block the light, so there would be shading on the underneath of his arm, on the front of his legs there, and then also where his tail is closest to his body. The darkest color I'm going to use on the fox is the E57, where with the bear I went out to the E59. Him I'm coloring slightly just lighter, so using the same colors. But this is one of those things, and if you watch my videos, you've probably heard me say this before, that I can give you the color combination that I used, and yours still won't look like mine. And it's not because I'm not any better than you, but it's because people use things in different quantities. And so if I added more of the E57, he would be darker. If I added less, he would be lighter. So it just depends on your coloring style and how heavy-handed you are with certain colors. And even for myself, when I color, if I colored the same thing twice, you know, sometimes you just get lost in that zone and you're just coloring, and you can have it where you colored it yourself 2 times and it still don't look the same. So I'm using that E50 to blend out his belly, and then I wanted him to be a little bit warmer. So instead of just coloring a whole new fox, what I did is I picked a E that was a little bit more red, and then I'm just going to go over his entire outside, not his belly or his face, but the rest of his body with that, and that will add a little bit of warmth, a little bit of red, and make him look different. Again, if you watch the videos, you know what's coming. I outline all of my images in a Copic safe writing pen, and I did chase all those little die cuts around like a crazy person to outline them. I laid out all of my characters so I could see where I wanted to stamp my sentiment. This sentiment is actually 2 different. The first one says, "You're an A+ kind of," and then you can fill in teacher or friend. So I mounted them together, but they're actually 2 separate stamps. And then we're going to start building up the little scene we've got going on here. So the bear and the fox are going to be adhered down flat. So will the apple too, but you'll see in a minute how I kind of had to play with that. So I adhered them down flat. And then I got some Scotch foam tape for the rest of the little guys here. Now with that bus, I left too much foam tape on there, and you'll see why that's a problem in a minute. So I wanted my little mouse to be reaching up for that apple, so I'm going to lay everything out where I want it to be. And then I put a little bit of glue on his feet, just so I could stick him to the pencil and have him in position before I added my foam tape. That, for me, seems to be the easiest way to add things like that, where you're trying to put them together as one piece. And then there was just a little bit that you could see, so I'm just trimming that off with my scissors. I'm gonna go ahead and adhere the pencil and the mouse there where I want them. And then I'm also going to add the bus. Now, remember I said I left too much foam tape on that bus. There, it goes almost all the way to the edge. This is problematic for me because I'm trying to slide that apple underneath there. So I do have to peel up the bus a little bit to get it positioned where I want. It wasn't like a huge deal, but if you're going to try to do that, try to give yourself a little bit of wiggle room. Don't take your sketch foam tape all the way up to the very edge. Give yourself a little bit to slide that underneath. So once I have that in position, I did fuss with it for just a little bit. Then the last thing that I'm going to do is add some clear Wink of Stella. I did it to the apple, the pencil, and the box, and then the windows on the school bus. And then that's it. That's the whole card. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you guys had a good time, learned some stuff, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.